All right, so for this game, looks like we have a standard sequencing setup. So I guess we'll set it up accordingly. We have what looks like 6 positions to work with. So we'll have just 1 through 6. And the elements themselves, we have F, G, H, and then we've got J, K, and L. So I guess let's take a look at the rules. The first rule tells us that J has to go before H, so we can set that up accordingly. We have J before H. Next, G has to go at some point before K, so once again, G before K. Nothing too exciting so far. Next, we are told that G has to go immediately next to, basically one way or the other, but right next to L. And we've already got a G on the board, so we can easily connect these in. We can say that L and G are just going to be consecutive, and we'll put a little double-sided arrow to show that they can still flip either way. And lastly, we are told that there's exactly 1 in between J and L. Now, this, it seems like we could kind of connect it because we have a J and the L over here. So these two sets of rules, yeah, they do seem to interconnect to some degree. But there's a good chance you'd find it hard to kind of meaningfully put these rules together because we don't know which side they're going to go on, right? Whether it's J before L or L before J. So that kind of makes it difficult to do that. So what we'll do is we'll keep that as a separate rule. We'll say that J and L will simply have exactly 1 space between them. And we'll put a double-sided arrow there to show that it could go either way. That said, though, that's kind of significant because, I mean, especially with the LG block, because then depending on where you put the LG block, it's going to take up 2 of 6 spaces right there. In fact, it might be worth exploring where could we put the LG block. Obviously, 5 and 6 are out of the question because there's no room for K. If we did 4 and 5, though, could we do that? I mean, K would have to go into 6, and the J, and this is where it gets a little bit messy because if the L was in 5 with the LG block, then that wouldn't really work because then the J would have to go into 3 and there would be no room for the H to follow. So, but you could still do L in the 4, and then I suppose the J could go into 2 and then the H could go into 3. So there is a little bit of flexibility there. So, and then going backwards, 3 and 4, 2, 3, 1, 2, I think that those could work. So you know what? It looks like there's a bit of flexibility here. Let's leave this open and go straight into the questions. The first question here asks what could be a complete setup of the game. So as usual, we go by the original set of rules. First rule, J before H. So going down the line, A looks good, B looks good, C looks good, D does not. We have H first, which certainly would not work. And E is good. Next, we have to have G before K. Let's take a look. A is fine, B is not. We have K before G, which is not cool. C looks okay, and E looks okay as well. Next, L and G have to be next to each other. So answer choice A already violates that because they're certainly separated. And between C and E, they are okay on that rule. And lastly, we have to have exactly 1 between J and L. And since we're just down to C and E, answer choice C looks like it violates that. We have 2 in between. That doesn't work. And the last answer choice E, they do have exactly 1 between them. So we're good. Best answer to question number 1 is E. And as usual, I suppose let's plug that into the board. So we essentially have J, G, L followed by H, K, and F. Next, question number, I guess our first local, actually our only local question here is question number 5. So I guess let's jump to question number 5. We have, if F is not in the first position, so I guess if F wasn't first, as usual, the question becomes, what does that tell us? What does that mean for our game? And actually, F is pretty open, isn't it? Because if F isn't first, it seems like it could go virtually anywhere else, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's kind of a dead end. Although that does raise a separate question as well. If F is not first, essentially there's 2 considerations that you want to take into account. First of all, where could F go? Which, as we said, virtually anywhere. But the other question is that if F can't go first, who could potentially go first? And that might be worth exploring because you'll notice that we don't really have all that many others who could. I mean, H and K are out of the question because they have to go after something. So if H can't go first, K can't go first, F can't go first, that really leaves us with either J, who could go first, or alternatively, the LG block, which could go first. So what we can do is we can split this into two possibilities, since we have nothing else to go on here, that either this is going to be a J over here, or we're going to have an LG split over here. Now in the top scenario, this is a bit easier to work with, because if J is first, then L is going to have to go into 3, so that's a good start. Now from there, G is still a little bit flexible, because we could have a G over here and then everybody else would just follow after, which is fine. Or we could have a G over here, and as long as the K is over here somewhere, we're still okay. Now in the bottom scenario, we actually still have a little bit of flexibility, because if you put L into 1, then J could go third, and that's fine. Or if L is in 2, then J could go fourth, which is also cool. So you know what? Hopefully this is enough information. Let's see what we can do with the question itself. The question asks, what now could be true? A, H goes into 6. Now that's actually pretty okay, isn't it? Because H, just has to go after the J. So arguably, why not? That seemed like it could easily happen. Let's hold on to A and take a look at the rest. B, G goes at 5. Could we have a G in 5? And no, because in the second scenario, G has to be next to L somewhere here. But even in the top scenario, you'll notice that the G has to go next to L, so that's either 2 or 4. There's no way for the G to go into 5, so that certainly wouldn't work. Next, H goes at 3 o'clock. Could we do that? Now, this scenario, definitely not, but over here, you'll notice that that still wouldn't work, because L and G are taking up 1 and 2. So if you put an H over here, there's no room for the J to go prior, so that wouldn't work. Next, J goes at 2 o'clock, and also no, because either J is over here, or alternatively, this is one of L or G, so that also wouldn't work. And lastly, J is at 5 o'clock, and no, that wouldn't work, because even in the second scenario here, whether L is at 1 or 2, you'll have to have J with exactly 1 space between. So J would either go into 3 or J would go into 4, but it would never go into position number 5. So the best answer to question number 5 is A. Next, from here, I guess let's take a look back to the globals. Question number 2, what must be true? Answer choice A, L is earlier than H. Now, do we have to have L earlier than H? Now, in this scenario, it was, but you'll notice that in this scenario over here, we could have easily had an H over here, couldn't we? And then I guess the L, G, and then the K would go later. So it seems like L doesn't have to go. There's no reason that L would have to go earlier than H. Answer choice B, L is earlier than K. Does that have to be true, that L is before K? Oh, well, actually, yeah, obviously, because we know that the LG block has to go before the K, so that easily must be true. The best answer to question number 2 is B. That said, though, let's take a quick look at the rest just in case. Answer choice C, J is at 1 or 5. Do we have to have J at 1 or 5? And in this scenario, no, because we said we could have had L, for example, in 1, and then the J could have gone into 3, and nothing would have broken there, so there doesn't seem to be any reason that C has to be true. Next, F and J are not consecutive. Does it have to be that F and J are not consecutive? And I don't see why not. Couldn't you have shoved an F over here, for example, and then L, G, and then K and H would just shuffle over there? And that, again, that seems fine. Answer choice E, G and K are not consecutive. Does it have to be that G and K? And again, why not? Couldn't you have had, for example, I suppose actually no, in this scenario, if we have L, G, and K over here, that wouldn't work, because then 3 would have had to be a J. But in this scenario over here, couldn't we have easily had L, G, and then K over here? And yeah, that seems easily fine. So the best answer here, either way, was answer choice B. For the record, once you got to answer choice B on this one, you really could have just gone with it, because it's something that obviously has to be true based on this. So good workflow would not have been to check answer choices C, D, and E. Next, question number 3. The earliest that K could go is where? So what's the earliest that we could have a K? Now, I suppose the earliest, at the very least, we know K has to go after L and G. So we definitely couldn't have K at 1 or 2 o'clock, so that certainly gets rid of answer choices D and E. The question then, though, is could we have had the K at 3 o'clock? And that maybe seems okay. You're going to get into a bit of an issue with the L, but if you put the K over here and then you place the L over there, that actually could still work, because then the J could go into 4, right? We could, if you wanted to just make sure you could run the scenario, but it seems like we could have K here, L here, G there, and then we're okay. The J has to go one space away from the L, and then whoever's left, H and F, are just going to flip between 5 and 6. So it seems like 3 would be the earliest that K could go. The best answer to number 3 is C. Next, question number 4. The order in which, so basically, what would lock down the game completely? Let's take a look. Answer choice A. H is scheduled for 4 o'clock. Now, if we had H at 4 o'clock, would that entirely lock the game? Now, we have the one scenario here where H was at 4 and the game was locked, but that doesn't necessarily mean that H would lock the game. It just happened to be in that scenario. But overall, if H was in 4, the thing is, if you simply put an H over here, the J would have to go prior, so 1, 2, or 3. But that still seems pretty open in terms of what you could do. I suppose what you would have to do, though, is J and L, since they have to be one spot apart, they would have to go into 1 and 3. But look at it this way. K and F, for example, could easily go into 5 and 6, and they could go in any order because they have practically no restrictions, aside from the fact that they have to go later. So this really doesn't seem like it would completely lock the game. You could leave this open just in case you think you might have missed something, and in your first pass you shouldn't be digging too deep into it, but this seems like a very open kind of answer. Next, answer choice B, J is at 1. So if J is at 1, now you'll notice that we've had scenarios like this one where J was at 1, and the game was still quite open. We weren't able to figure out much more. So that certainly doesn't seem like it would lock the game entirely. Answer choice C, J goes at 5. Now, if you forced J into 5, I guess it would mean that H is in 6. Oh, but it also means that L has to be one space away, so L would have to go into 3, which, actually, I think we can do some damage with this. Let's run this scenario. If we have J in 5, then H would go into 6, and then L would have to be one space away from, but then K has to follow the L, so K would have to go into 4, and G still has to be right next to the L, so G would have to go into 2, and that forces F into 1. That does it. Best answer to question number 4 is C. Just in case, though, let's take a quick look at the other ones. Answer choice D. L is at 1 o'clock. Would that lock the game? Now, we had this one scenario where that was a possibility, but if you put L into 1, that would have forced G into 2, and then J would have to go into 3, but you'll notice that everything else is entirely flexible. H, K, and F would be able to do whatever, so that certainly wouldn't lock the game. Lastly, L is at 2 o'clock, and actually we have a scenario here. In this scenario, L was at 2, but H and F could still shuffle, so that certainly would not have locked the game. The best answer here is, once again, C. Lastly, question number 6. Which of the following must be true? What has to happen? Let's take a look. A, G is before 5 o'clock. So does G have to go at some point before 5 o'clock? And I suppose the question really becomes, could G go at 5 o'clock? And I think so, right? Because, I mean, we know G has to go before K, so G would go here, and then K would go here, and then L would go into 4, and I suppose J would go into 2 because they're one space apart. But that all seems fine. There doesn't seem to be any reason that G has to go before 5. Answer choice B, H is after 2. Does H have to go after 2? And again, I don't see why. In fact, in this scenario, couldn't we have had H at 2 o'clock? And that seems okay. And then L, G, and then K could go somewhere over there. That seems entirely plausible. Answer choice C, H is before 6 o'clock. And no, that definitely doesn't have to be true. We've seen H at 6 o'clock, so it doesn't have to go before. Answer choice D, K is before 6 o'clock. Does it have to be that K is before 6? And I don't see why, because K just has to go after the LG block. So in this scenario, for example, couldn't this have easily been K, and then everybody else would kind of fit in somewhere prior? That doesn't seem like it would break anything. Answer choice E, L is before 5 o'clock. Does that have to be true, that L's before 5? I suppose the question is, could L go into 5? And I mean, arguably, why not? If you put L into 5, then K would go into 6. Oh, we're going to run into trouble, because then G would have to go next to the L. In fact, we can kind of run this scenario. Let's use that template. If you put L into 5, then K has to follow, and then G would go next to it, but then J has to be one space apart from the L, and we don't have room for our H, which means that this wouldn't work. So the best answer to question number 6 is E. That must be true. L has to go before 5 o'clock.